Hi, hello, and welcome or welcome back to the Wool Sea Knitting channel. My name is Rachel, I am your host, and I am a knitter based out of Ottawa, Canada, and this channel is my chatty outlet to talk all things knitting with occasional guest appearances by other crafts. This video is the conclusion of my 2025 stash busting series, where my goal was to knit down 2,025 grams of yarn from my stash in the year 2025. If you haven't already seen them, I have two other videos where I talk about the goals and when they have been updated or when things have changed throughout this process, and a whole bunch of the projects I embarked on, I did to accomplish this goal. This video is going to be how much did I knit in the final quarter of 2025 to get yarn out of my stash, how much did I knit overall out of stash in 2025, and what is the status of my stash now. So as a refresher, at the end of quarter 3 of 2025, I had knit a total of 17,059 grams of yarn out of my stash. Within that overall total goal, where I am achieving victory or not, there were two other categories sort of subordinated within that I was tracking with interest, which is total yarn in, also measured in grams, and total yarn out of my house, which includes any yarn that went into a gift, as well as any yarn that was destashed, either by giving it away to a friend, donating it, or selling it. Another thing to note is whips do not count towards yarn used out of stash. I only count something as used from stash once it's completed, or one mitten or one sock. So my whips that have been hanging out on the needles, and I know from having used up certain balls of yarn that I have used 200 grams, doesn't count until I finished the project. Those numbers by the end of September 2025, aka my quarter 3, is I had 1,570 grams of yarn in, including hand spun, and 1,936 grams of yarn out of my house entirely. That is the one that I think is the most satisfying. I like the idea of overall reducing the amount of stuff that I have, especially as I'm preparing to move in the spring. And I was planning on moving this upcoming spring when I started this whole project. So the yarn out of my house category isn't the one where I achieve victory or not, but it is one that's still pretty important to me. So as a reminder, this is what my tracker looks like. It's color-coded based on, did I buy this yarn for myself? Did I buy it to finish a project? Things that were gifts, things that were just for me, souvenirs, handspun, etc. And I have color-coded in orange things that are from quarter 2, things are in pink from quarter 3. And very soon I will tell you all about quarter 4. If you watched my last video, you might remember that in late August, early September, I was struck down with de Quervain's tendinitis, which is a type of tendon inflammation injury in my right hand, which made it just kind of impossible to knit. Knitting really aggravated it and made it a lot more painful. And I basically stopped knitting for all of the autumn and early winter. This was a bummer. I really appreciate anybody who offered suggestions on how to heal and recover or things to do when I couldn't knit. As a pretty obsessive knitter, I followed, I think, almost all of them to pretty good success. And while I can knit now, I only really started knitting again in earnest in mid to late November, and I would do about 15 to 30 minutes at a time, once or twice a day, twice a week. I think until the last week of December, I knit a grand total of 8 hours in all of October, November, December. And in those 8 hours, I managed to complete 2 projects. I made this baby hat with ear flaps for a coworker who had a baby. The reason I still have it, and it's in my house covered in cat fur, is because I did not complete it in time before the baby was born and my coworker went on parental leave. So he'll be back in a few weeks and I'll give it to him then. And I knit the 1-year-old size in anticipation of the baby's second winter, not the first, so I'm not too concerned about having not been able to give it in time. But this ended up getting 32 grams of yarn out of my stash. This is Senna's Garn Duo. It is a merino cotton blend, and I was very happy to use these because they're leftover from a pillow I made my brother. And I think it's really cute. This came out of a book of baby knits, think it's 52 baby knits that my mom got me for my birthday. And I've knit 2 things from that book with plans of making many more. I really like the patterns. It has these really cute garter ear flaps, and I modified the strings down here to be I-cord, but they're supposed to be braided strands of yarn, and I'm really happy with it. Importantly, I didn't cast this on in Q4, which is the relevant time period for this portion of the video. I had already cast this on in August before my hand became a problem. So I didn't start it, I just finished it. And I did this on, I think, 3.75 millimeter needles. And I found that that was a lot more comfortable than any of the many fingering weight projects that I had on the needles. And I was able to finish this in a series of 15-minute chunks, which for a baby hat in the round stockinette ended up not being that difficult. This was probably the most manageable thing that I had on the needles for my hands at the time, which is why I was able to finish it. The second thing I knit, I actually don't have anymore, but I have an almost identical one, so I'm going to show you mine. I, as a birthday gift for my friend, finished knitting one of the Dot Pebbles / Claire Garland frogs and a matching pink sweater. I used different yarn than this one, but it's the exact same pattern. I didn't make any modifications, and I added wired legs to that one so that my friend could pose him. That got 27 grams of yarn out of my stash, and she seems very happy with him. She sent me photos of her frog around her house, and that was the goal. I did give it to her 2 months after her birthday because I couldn't finish it in time because my hand was all messed up, but I'm still really happy to have made that for her, managed to finish it, and complete that project. I can still consider this to be just such a fun knit, and it's, again, pretty fast, which is why I was able to actually do it, even if it took me 2 months longer than I expected. And I learned that each one of these limbs, not including the foot, takes me 15 minutes to knit. So I would do like one and then wait a while and then finish the foot, and then like 3 days later I would finish the next one. So that was kind of funny for me through my like physio mandated only 15 to 30 minutes of knitting a day, how much I actually get done in 15 minutes. And I finished the toe of a sock. I started them again in August, thinking I will certainly have these Halloween socks done in time to wear in October. I didn't, but I did manage to finish one sock, and that counts as 29 grams of yarn out of my stash. But I also then, because I was feeling so sorry for myself not being able to knit, I purchased the Advent or the countdown calendar that Tiny Human Knits put out. Tiny Human Knits is one of my all-time favorite hand dyers. I also really like her podcast. I love her color sensibilities, and she announced that she was doing a countdown calendar where 4 Sundays before Christmas, you unwrap one skein of self-striping yarn with a coordinating mini skein for heel toe cuff. And the palette was inspired by the 4 seasons. I really love the idea of seasonal inspiration. I've done many seasonal inspiration for knitting videos, and I love the color palettes associated with the 4 seasons, so I got that. So each one of those was 70 grams, which means times 4 is 280 grams. So I ended up with a lower total at the end of the year than I had at the end of Q3. So from my knitting, I have removed 88 grams of yarn from stash, and 2/3 of that counts as total yarn out of my house things because they're gifts. And I also gave away 88 grams of yarn. So in total, the yarn out for Q4 is 176 grams of yarn. But because I also then bought the Advent calendar, overall, I ended Q4 with more yarn in than out, which is the first time that's happened this year. So with a goal of being net negative 2,025 grams of yarn in 2025, I finished 2025 with net negative 1,655 grams of yarn out of stash, which otherwise means I very much did not achieve my goal. I did, however, get over 2,000 grams of yarn out of my house because that category doesn't count yarn in. So out of my house, I got 2,083 grams of yarn out of my stash, which I am very satisfied with. I did want more, but I did have to also adjust my expectations. Post-injury, couldn't knit for a whole quarter of this year, basically, and I got to cut myself some slack. And I overall brought into my house 1,850 grams of yarn, again, including handspun. So I did not succeed. And I'm a little bit frustrated by this, but mostly as an outlet of my frustration towards my hand injury in general, which has been a sort of dominating feature of the last few months for me. Before it hit, I was feeling so much inspiration for scrap busting and finding creative uses that I thought were really beautiful and practical with the yarn that I had. And then I had to pump the brakes on everything and see my goal kind of slip away when I just couldn't knit in order to recover for a while. On the flip side, part of the reason why I fell so short is also because I continued to buy yarn kind of all year. I don't really regret any of it. Most of it was used pretty quickly after I bought it, and the rest I have pretty concrete plans of things I want to use it for, and I'm looking forward to once I'm able to knit a little bit more. But really, I think this has shown me how easy it is to buy and how long it takes me to use stuff. And forgive me for leading you to what feels like an incredibly obvious conclusion, which is it's a lot harder to achieve a stash down goal if you continue to buy yarn. But I think it's a little bit different to see it concretely in numbers for myself. That brings us to January 2026. Knowing that my move is on the horizon and that my knitting is still at a much slower pace than it was before, and I will likely have to maintain that much slower pace for a while to make sure I don't suffer any significant setbacks in making sure that my hands are okay, I decided to destash by selling on my Instagram stories, Ravelry, and Facebook Marketplace, to me, significant portion of my yarn. I had really resisted selling yarn or doing like an official destash for a long time for many reasons, mostly because it kind of felt like admitting failure, and it really felt like cheating to say, I want to be down 2,025 grams of yarn in 2025, and I can achieve that by just selling 2,000 grams of yarn. But at this point, I need to be practical. I am moving, and I'm knitting a lot less than I have been in previous years because de Quervain's, for me at least, is taking months to recover from. I can knit now, and I am knitting much more than before, and my hand feels okay, but like I have to do a lot to make sure it stays okay, and I don't want to push it. And having a big stash is starting to feel like more pressure than it did when I was knitting at a steady rate. So with this in mind, I listed 1,300 grams of yarn, and I have since sold all but one skein. So this yarn came from, I had bought a sweaters quantity to use along with a whole bunch of existing scrap to make a colorwork sweater. And then I looked at the pattern and I realized I had bought a completely wrong weight of yarn for it, and none of my scraps were going to work either. The quantity of yarn that I had was assuming that it was just going to be the main color of a big colorwork sweater, which meant it wasn't a full garment quantity, and it wasn't soft enough that I would want as a winter accessory. I had another scant garments quantity that fell in the same category. I bought some skeins to use for a particular pattern, no longer wanted to knit that pattern, but then didn't have enough yarn to make any other pattern that I would want in that yarn. So I sold it, and I feel so much better for it. And then there were a few odd skeins here and there, like a couple sock yarns that I had bought because they were on sale and I wanted to hit a free shipping minimum, or a skein of yarn that I had bought because I thought that I had nowhere near enough to finish the sweater in a discontinued yarn, and I was going to do a contrast cuffs, hem, and neck in this skein that I bought. And then not only did I have enough in the original discontinued yarn, but because I had gone off pattern, I actually had almost an entire skein left of the original yarn. All those little skeins, right now, they're not serving me. They were just stressing me out, and I felt a lot of guilt. So I effectively then destashed about 1,200 grams of yarn through selling it. I then looked through and found another 300 odd grams of yarn to donate to the senior center near me that does craft stuff and is always looking for yarn donations. I speak to them on the phone to confirm. And after all that, I destashed approximately 1,300 grams of yarn in about just 2 weeks. And from there, I had a lot of momentum, and I decided to, for the first time in my life, actually weigh all the yarn that I have. I had never done a full catalog. I didn't really feel it was necessary. And also, the majority of my stash is oddballs and scraps, and the idea of weighing and cataloging every single one of those just did not appeal to me. Then I saw Nitty Natty did a yarn categorization video and very helpfully included a template for how to do it. I used that to weigh everything I had. The measurements are not very precise because there are several points where I just weighed a whole bag, emptied out the bag, weighed the bag, and subtracted that from my total. But overall, post the destash that I had done in the first weeks of January, not including whips, I have 8,046 grams of yarn. I think realistically, this is probably closer to 8,200 because I know I have a ball that's almost entirely intact of black Patton's Kroy sock yarn. I could not find it to weigh this. I know I have it. I know it's somewhere in this house, and that would be at least 50 grams. And I feel like there's a couple other balls in that category, probably in the same bag as the Patton's Kroy that's missing. So I feel like 8,000 is a little low. Also, I know that at least 2 of my current whips are not going to use up the entire skeins I have for them. So I feel like the scraps of that plus the missing Patton's Kroy, I will find you, would bring my total closer to 8,200. But as it stands, I allegedly have 8,000 grams of yarn, which is less than I thought. I was aiming for under 10,000. I had suspected for most of last year that I was sitting around the 10,000 gram mark, and I was sort of close. If you think about it, 8,000 plus 1,300 that I just destashed, plus the yarn I have set aside for whips. That brings us to just under 10,000 grams of yarn, which is 10 kilos. Like, that's kind of a lot. I feel actually a lot better for having this information, and now I know, as I continue to destash in 2026, I'm working from 8,000 grams of yarn. I did use this destash time to reorganize all of my stash, to do the Marie Kondo thing of taking it out and looking at it, and I did reorganize things in a way that I think makes more sense. For example, here is all of my fancier sock yarn. This is the self-striping, the hand-dye, the indie, or things that are skeined. Like this is Cascade, which is not fancy, but it's skeined. Under my bed, I have a box of my Patton's Kroy stash and my more commercial sock yarns, which I like having on hand all the time for gifts. I have my hand-spun yarns plus yarns I purchased at Twist Fiber Festival bag. I have my projects to be unraveled plus yarn suitable for babies bag, and also within this is yarn I'm keeping off to the side for mending, and then a few other bags which are just yarn for like 2 particular projects, like my sweater quantities. I look at my whole stash and I think I would like there to be less, but I don't know by how much. And the main thing that's actually held me off from recording this video earlier, when it made more sense to do a 2025 wrap-up as opposed to the end of January, is I actually don't have a satisfying conclusion or idea to bring to you of where I want to go next. I know I have a little bit more than 8,000 grams of yarn in my house. I know that this is more than I want, but not by leagues. But I don't know how much I want. I think the most useful anchor point that I have is I was talking about this with one of my friends. Carolyn said, well, how much do you knit in the average year? And I looked back at my past 3 years of tracking how much by weight I knit in a year. And I think that that number, averaged over those 3 years, is about 2,500, 2,600 grams of yarn in a year. Going by that, I think I'm most comfortable having on hand 1 to 2 years of knitting at all times. I don't want to be stashless. I like having yarn. I like being able to buy things to support people and supply chains that align with what I want to be making and wearing. And I like my stash. I like looking at my hand spun. I like looking at the souvenirs I have from special trips and that I wouldn't normally be able to have. So the goal isn't to be entirely without yarn. I think ideally I would reduce the overall amount that I have right now by 1/3, but have the majority of that come out of my scraps. I think the only part of it that still kind of stresses me out and isn't inspirational and doesn't feed my creativity is the very significant portion of my stash that is oddments. That's scraps, that's not exactly a useful amount for— No! She did that the last time I filmed. She thought I wouldn't notice because I didn't notice the first time. She's not allowed on the side tables. And she knows that. Amounts of yarn that's too much to discard but too little to make something immediately obvious with, and not enough that I feel comfortable donating it because I don't feel like it's going to get used. So I feel responsible for it. So if I could reduce the amount of random scraps I have by like 4/5, that I think would be the most satisfying to me. So I guess my real conclusion is my ideal stash amount would be probably somewhere in the realm of 5,000 or 6,000 grams of yarn, mostly in 3 sweater quantities, sock scraps that I can use for colorwork socks, a smaller but still present baby appropriate knits bag, and significantly fewer oddballs. So those are really my goals for 2026. And I'm hoping to be able to come to you with more fun videos where I talk about how I'm using up those scraps and bringing you maybe some creative or inspiring ideas for how to use them. But we'll see. We all know I'm pretty unreliable with these videos. That doesn't mean I'm not happy to have you here. Thank you so much for watching. Please let me know, do you have any stash down goals for 2026? Did you do any stash busting or scrap busting in 2025, and how did it go? If you made it this far and you aren't subscribed, it would really be cool if you subscribed and liked this video, but no pressure. Yeah, okay. Well, wishing you and yours all the best. If you're in the Northern Hemisphere, stay warm, and I hope, but cannot guarantee, that we will talk soon. Okay.